What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing another updated hero guide, this time focusing on REY, or as me and a few of my subscribers like to call her, REY Sue. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually really like REY as a character, but she is pretty overpowered in the new movies, and similar to the movies, she's also fairly overpowered in Battlefront 2 as well. In saying that, I actually think REY should set the standard for how powerful each hero should be in Battlefront 2. I think the issue lies more in that the other heroes are probably a little useless sometimes, so honestly, if every hero was as powerful as REY, I'd probably be pretty happy with that, because despite being really powerful, for the most part she is also fairly balanced as well. So anyway, in these guides I do cover both Galactic Assault and the Heroes vs Villain game modes as well, so I'll separate both game modes and touch on both the best star cards to use and the best tactics to use in each game mode as well. Before I get stuck into that though, I'll just quickly touch on REY's HP and abilities, just so that any newer players out there can get a good idea of how she plays. So she starts off with 750 HP, which is the equal highest for all light side heroes, and she does have a health regen star card as well, so she's definitely up there with one of the better characters in the game when it comes to her health. As for her sprint speed, she's the second fastest on the light side, coming in second to Luke. However, it's not by very much, so her speed is definitely another one of her strengths, as not many people are going to be able to outrun her on the battlefield. Just like the other Force users in the game, she does also have the ability to Force jump, so definitely try and make the most of that as well. Her weapon of choice is a very iconic blue lightsaber, which for some reason the game states to be as REY's lightsaber. However, as most of you would know, it's actually Anakin's lightsaber, which Obi-Wan then passed down to Luke and then ended up in the hands of REY in The Force Awakens. She has a fairly quick swing speed with this saber, and she has the highest damage output of all light side saber users as well, so she's definitely pretty deadly when it comes to saber battles. So now moving on to her abilities, and she does have a pretty well-rounded set of abilities to choose from. Her L1 ability is called Dash Strike, and this just sends REY charging forward with her lightsaber, dealing damage to anyone that she hits and also knocking them off their feet at the same time. Not only is this ability super useful for chasing down a running enemy, but if you ever find yourself stuck in a corner surrounded by enemies, then this is an awesome way to be able to escape without taking too much damage. Her L1 ability is called Insight, and this is easily her best ability and arguably one of the better abilities in the game, especially when it comes to playing the objective. This ability reveals all nearby enemies not only to REY but to the rest of your teammates as well, meaning you can pretty much see the whole enemy team through walls so long as they're close enough to be spotted. It also gives her unlimited stamina and increased damage while the ability is active, so not only are you able to hunt down enemies easier, but you're also able to take them out a whole lot easier. Her R1 ability is called Mind Trick, and what this ability does is actually reverses the controls for enemies within the area of effect, generally leading to them just wandering around like that drunk bloke out the front of the pub. Now, more experienced players will generally know how to quickly switch it up and reverse the controls on their own to try and combat this, but even then it's still going to be hard for them to function properly, as it also reduces their sensitivity by a long way, meaning they won't be able to aim very well either. So that's pretty much all of the base tips covered. Now we're going to move on to some of the best tips to use when it comes to Galactic Assault. So to start off, I'm just going to go through some of her best star cards to use in Galactic Assault, and despite being one of the better characters in the game, to be honest, she doesn't really have a great spread of star cards to choose from. In saying that, her good cards are still very good, so I'm going to cover the ones that I think are worth mentioning, but as I always say in these videos, I'd definitely recommend trying all the cards on your own anyway, as there may be some that just suit your playstyle better than others. So the first card that I'm going to recommend is called Survivor, and this is the single card that I'd recommend using at all times in Galactic Assault. No matter what other cards you pick, this card should always pretty much be equipped. This is REY's health on kill card, so I'm sure you all know how these work by now, but if you don't, it's pretty much just each time you get a kill with this card equipped, you'll regain 20 HP, and fully upgraded you'll earn a whopping 60 HP for each enemy villain that you can take out as well. If you're looking to go on some kill streaks with REY, then again, this is a card that I'd definitely recommend using at all times. The next card I'm going to recommend is her Far Sight card, and this just increases the area of effect for the Insight ability that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, the further away you can see your enemies, the better, so there's not really much to say for this card, as it is pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty much just going to give you and your teammates a much better chance of attacking or defending objectives. Third card I'm going to recommend is her Focus Sight card, which again just improves the Insight ability even further. This card makes Insight last longer, and fully upgraded it extends the ability by a whole 7 seconds. Now, on its own, the ability lasts for 15 seconds, so this card extends that to 22 seconds, and with only a 10-second cooldown for the inside ability, you can literally have it active for 2/3 of the time you're alive, which is actually pretty crazy now that I think of it. So this is another card that I definitely have to recommend using at all times. Now, I don't usually do this in these guides, but I'm actually going to recommend a card that you guys should stay away from at all times. Her Street Fighter card, which reduces her stamina drain, is one that I actually see a lot of people using because obviously with the recent changes to the stamina system, it comes across as a pretty appealing card to use. However, because of the cards that I just mentioned, you can actually have unlimited stamina for 2/3 of the time you're alive, like I just mentioned. So the stamina drain card is actually pretty useless for that reason, and it's definitely one that I recommend staying away from because of that. So now moving on to some tips for Galactic Assault, and the main one I have for REY is just to play super aggressive, almost as much as you would with someone like Maul or Luke. Her inside ability on its own is just going to completely turn the tides of the game regardless if you're a good player or not. So if you can get yourself up towards the front lines and into some good spots on the map, you're going to help your team out a lot more than you'd probably realise. Not only that, but being up in some aggressive areas with the inside ability active, it should be pretty easy to get some good kill streaks going, as you'll be able to figure out the best plan of attack to take out enemies that you can already see, which leaves a lot less room for error. Another tip I have, which relates to her dash strike, is just to cancel it as soon as you've hit the targets you are aiming at and then attack with your saber straight away. A lot of people seem to cancel the charge by pressing L1 for a second time or actually dashing away, which will actually add a bit of an animation at the end, but if you just swing your saber as soon as you hit the enemy with the charge, it will actually straight away cancel the ability and you'll pretty much instantly take out the enemy rather than hitting them once and then killing them a second or two later. Other than that, the only tips I have are just the usual tips that I'd say for a saber hero, which is just to make sure you're always on the move and using your speed and abilities to your advantage. REY is crazy powerful in Galactic Assault, so you should have no problems getting some massive kill streaks with her, especially if you use some of the tips that I just mentioned. So now we're going to move on to some of the best star cards to use in the Heroes vs Villain game modes, and again, most of these cards aren't all that useful, so I'll quickly touch on the ones that are actually worth using. Now, the first card that I recommended for Galactic Assault, which was the Survivor card, this card still can be useful for these game modes, however, it's not as much of a necessity as it is in Galactic Assault, so it's really up to you whether you want to choose this card or one of the ones that I'm about to mention. Again, the Focus Sight card that I mentioned earlier as well is probably the one card that I'd always recommend for these game modes for the exact same reason that I mentioned before. The unlimited stamina in HVV and Showdown is going to keep you alive a lot longer, and remember that it does also give you increased damage as well, so it's going to help a lot with any saber battles. The next card I'm going to recommend is the Deep Mind card, and what this does is it gives the Mind Trick ability a longer duration on anyone who's already been revealed by the Inside ability. Seeing as you should pretty much always have the Inside ability active, this pretty much just means that anyone you hit with the Mind Trick is going to be affected for a longer period of time. The fourth and final card I'm going to recommend is the Opportunist Star card, and this just makes it so that you deal extra damage to anyone who's been affected by the Mind Trick ability. This card, in tandem with the last card I mentioned, is a recipe for success in these game modes. If you just keep using the Insight and Mind Trick abilities on your enemies, you're going to absolutely destroy most other players, and there's not really too much that they can actually do about it. So now moving on to some tips for HVV and Hero Showdown, and in regards to the last two star cards that I mentioned, the Mind Trick ability can actually be even more useful than most people give it credit for. Like I said earlier in the video, it massively reduces the sensitivity of anyone who gets hit by it, and on top of that, it actually can't be blocked by anyone in the game. Because of that, the best way to use it is actually to hit your enemies with it and then quickly dash behind them and attack them from behind, because they won't actually be able to block your attacks, and then the fact that they can't turn around means they're pretty much just going to have to stand there while you completely destroy them. It's also a good idea to use the dash strike ability as often as you possibly can, especially if you can time it right and hit enemies when they're not blocking. Knocking enemies off their feet in these game modes is so helpful, as it's going to leave them completely defenseless, which obviously allows you to deal some really quick damage before they get a chance to get back on their feet. So that's going to be it for our updated REY guide, guys. Hopefully some of these tips helped you out, and if they did, then make sure to leave a like down below to help support the channel. Like I mentioned earlier, if you do have any tips of your own, then definitely don't hesitate to let everyone know. The more tips the better, so definitely feel free to leave your own tips down in the comments section. If you are new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe and make sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any Battlefront 2 guides or live streams. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.